That morning, nothing felt wrong. The streets were awake. People were moving. Life was normal. But inside one house, something had already gone terribly wrong. No one heard a scream. No one saw it happen. And by the time anyone noticed, 11 people were already dead. On the morning of July 1st, 2018, in the Burari district of North Delhi, a neighbor named Gurcharan Singh noticed that the Bhatia family's grocery shop had not opened. This was unusual. The Bhatias opened at 6 in the morning. They had opened at 6 in the morning for as long as anyone in the neighborhood could remember. Gurcharan knew the family well. He walked with one of them every morning. He decided to check on them. He walked to their 3-story home on Sant Nagar Street. The front door was unlocked. He pushed it open. And inside that house, he found 11 members of the same family. 3 generations, from a 15-year-old boy to an 80-year-old grandmother. All dead. 10 of them hanging from the iron grill of the ceiling in a single room, arranged in a circle, their faces covered, their mouths taped, their hands tied. The grandmother in a separate room, strangled, lying on her side on the floor. On the roof, the family dog had been tied to a post. It was barking at the sky. Gurcharan Singh had walked into that house because a shop had not opened on time. He would not be the same after it. Nobody who walked into that house would be the same after it. And the question that would follow everyone who touched this case, the investigators, the psychiatrists, the journalists, the neighbors, the millions of people across India who read about it and could not stop thinking about it, was not how 11 people had died in one night. It was how 11 people had lived the way they had been living for 11 years, without a single person outside those walls knowing what was happening inside them. Before the investigation, before the diaries, before any of it, there was a family. A real, breathing, laughing, working, ordinary family who lived in a 3-story house in Burari and ran a grocery shop and a plywood business and hosted engagement parties and knew their neighbors by name and were, by every account of every person who knew them, a family you would want to live next door to. The Bhatias were 3 generations under one roof. At the head of the family, the matriarch, Narayani Devi, 80 years old, the grandmother everyone called Bebe. Her 2 sons, Bhuvnesh, 50, steady and dependable, the older brother, and Lalit, 45, the youngest son, the one everyone described as the most charismatic, the most driven, the one who held the family together after their father died. Their wives, their sister Pratibha, widowed, living with the family as she always had, and 5 grandchildren. The youngest 2, both 15 years old, boys who went to school and played cricket and recharged their family members' phones on the last night of all their lives. The Hindu newspaper described them with a headline that has stayed with everyone who covered this story: 11 bright people with one dark secret. But the word secret does not capture what this was. A secret implies concealment, implies that the people keeping it know it should be hidden. What the Bhatia family had was something more disorienting than a secret. It was a world, an entire internal world that had been building inside that house for 11 years, invisible to everyone outside it, so ordinary seeming on the surface that not one of their neighbors, not one of their relatives, not one of their friends, none of them had ever had a reason to look more carefully. 10 days before they died, the Bhatia family hosted an engagement party. Relatives came, food was served, photographs were taken. People laughed and celebrated and went home. Nobody noticed anything wrong. Nobody sensed anything coming. And yet inside that house, the 11 diaries were already written. The final ritual had already been planned. The stools had already been purchased. Everything was already in motion. And not one person at that party saw it.
To understand what happened to the Bhatia family, you have to start 11 years before the morning Gurcharan Singh walked through that door. You have to start with a death. Not the 11 deaths, a different one, an ordinary one. The death of a father. In 2007, Bhopal Singh, the patriarch of the Bhatia family, the man who had built what they had, who had moved them from Haryana to Delhi and established the businesses and held the family together, died of natural causes. He was elderly. It was not unexpected. Families lose their fathers. Families grieve and carry on. This is how life works. But for Lalit, the youngest son, his father's death did something that nobody around him fully registered at the time. Lalit became introverted, withdrawn. He stopped talking as freely as he had before, and then something happened that would become the central fact of the next 11 years of this family's life. Lalit lost his voice. Not metaphorically, physically. He could not speak. Investigators later learned that Lalit had previously survived a fire that his business competitors had allegedly set in his warehouse. A traumatic incident for which he never received proper psychological treatment. His father's death compounded what was already fractured inside him. And in the silence that followed, something filled the space where his voice had been. One day, Lalit told his family that his father's soul had entered his body, that Bhopal Singh was not gone, that he was communicating through Lalit, giving instructions, offering guidance, telling the family how to live, how to prosper, how to hold together. The family was deeply religious. They believed in the soul's continuation after death. And in the months that followed, something happened that turned belief into conviction. The family followed Lalit's instructions, and the family's fortunes improved. The businesses did better. Things went well. And when things go well, people do not question why. Then, during a family prayer session, a daily recitation of the Hanuman Chalisa that had become part of their routine, Lalit's voice came back, spontaneously, without medical explanation. To the Bhatia family, the answer was not medical. The answer was standing right in front of them. His father had healed him. His father was here. And from that day forward, not one member of the family questioned Lalit again. What investigators found inside the Bhatia house, beyond the 11 bodies, beyond the taped mouths and bound hands and the covered faces, was 11 diaries. 11 notebooks maintained over 11 years, from September 2007 to the day before the deaths, containing thousands of handwritten entries. And what those entries showed was not a family in crisis. It was a family in order, a family following a system that had been running quietly and completely for over a decade. The diaries were written primarily by two of the granddaughters, Priyanka and Neetu, but the content was dictated by Lalit, or rather, by whoever Lalit believed was speaking through him. The entries were, at first, conversational, warm even. Notes about daily life, about family, about faith. But over time, the tone shifted. The entries became more directional, more authoritative. A voice that said, "This is what will be done, and nobody will question what is written here." Forensic handwriting analysts confirmed that the diaries showed an escalating pattern, from shared devotional practice to something that had no clean name in the vocabulary the investigators were working with. The entries covered everything: how the family should pray, what they should eat, how they should conduct themselves in business, and eventually, how they should conduct the ritual. The final ritual.
The one that the last entry described in complete detail. Which members should stand where, how the binding should be done, what the faces should be covered with, how the grandmother, who could not stand, should be positioned. The diary stated, with the calm certainty of something written by someone who expected everyone to survive, everyone will tie their own hands, and when the ritual is done, everyone will help each other untie. Read that again. They were not expecting to die. The final entry of the final diary, written the day before 11 people were found dead, ended with this sentence: "Keep water in a cup, and when it changes color, I will appear and save you." Someone in that family wrote those words the night before they died, believing them completely. That is not the sentence of a family that understood what was about to happen to them. That is the sentence of a family that had stopped being able to tell the difference between faith and instruction, between love and obedience, between what they chose and what they had been told to choose so many times that the difference had ceased to exist. The CCTV cameras around the Bhatia family home recorded the last 24 hours of 11 lives with the indifferent accuracy of machines that do not know what they are watching. Investigators reviewed this footage after the bodies were found. What they saw was not chaos. It was not distress. It was a family preparing for something with the calm, methodical care of people who believed they knew exactly what they were doing and why. 10 days before the night of June 30th, CCTV footage showed Tina Lalit's wife and their son Shivam going out to purchase 4 stools. Not one stool, 4, placed in a specific configuration, in a specific room, for a specific purpose that the diaries had already described. The family was shopping for their ritual, the way anyone shops for a ceremony they have been planning. With a list, with intention, with the ordinary domestic concentration of people who have things to do. On the evening of June 30th itself, at 10:29 in the night, the last timestamp on any recording that shows any of the family alive, Shivam, Lalit's 15-year-old son, walks to the family's plywood shop and brings a small bundle of wire upstairs. Earlier that same evening, someone had recharged all of the family's mobile phones. In the kitchen, police found a packet of milk in the refrigerator and a bowl of soaked chickpeas on the counter, food being prepared for the following morning. A morning 11 people in that house would not see. The police officer who led the Burari investigation later said, "I do not think anybody has ever seen this kind of crime scene in their life. This is something etched in my mind until the day I die." And this is a man who has worked serious criminal cases. A man trained not to react to what he finds at a scene. What broke through his professional armor was not the violence of what he saw. It was the order of it, the arrangement, the care with which 11 people had prepared for something they were told would save them, and which they followed, to the end, believing that it would. When investigators first arrived at the Bhatia house on the morning of July 1st, they filed it as a murder case. This was the correct first instinct. 11 people do not die in one night in one house without that being the starting assumption. They looked for an outsider. They reviewed every camera around the property. They found no one. Not one person outside the Bhatia family had entered or exited the house on the night of June 30th. The deaths were not caused by anyone who came from outside. And yet, the elder brother of Lalit and Bhuvanesh, the only surviving member of the family's original generation, who lived in Rajasthan and had not been present, refuses to accept the official conclusion. He has stated publicly that if Lalit and his wife orchestrated this, their hands should have been free rather than tied. He believes it was murder. that someone made it look like what the investigators concluded it was. He cannot accept the alternative. Because the alternative requires accepting something about his family that the mind resists with everything it has. The official conclusion, reached after months of investigation and review by psychiatrists and forensic experts, is shared psychotic disorder, a condition sometimes called folie à famille, madness within a family. The theory is that Lalit, suffering from an undiagnosed and untreated delusional disorder following compounding traumas, genuinely believed his dead father was speaking through him, and that his belief transmitted with the authority of the family patriarch, reinforced by the family's improving fortunes, embedded in daily ritual and written instruction over 11 years, was absorbed by every other member of the family until it became indistinguishable from reality. One man's private delusion became 11 people's shared world. But here is the question that the psychiatric diagnosis does not close. It explains the mechanism. It does not explain the silence. It does not explain how 11 people, educated, socially connected, warm, and seemingly present in the world outside their door, maintained a complete interior life that nobody outside ever glimpsed. It does not explain how a 15-year-old boy, growing up in the modern world, with access to school and friends and the internet, never said a word to anyone. The psychiatrist Rachna Johri, who studied this case, asked it this way: I do not know how the multiplicity of voices, which is usually there in human beings, can be so completely silenced. Neither does anyone else.
There is something that needs to be said about the Bhatia family before this story moves any further. Something that gets lost in the clinical language of shared psychosis and delusional disorder and folie à famille. These were not weak people. These were not uneducated people. These were not isolated people who had been cut off from the world and had no reference point against which to measure what was happening inside their home. Priyanka, the eldest granddaughter, was 33 years old. She had friends. She had a life outside the house. She was engaged to be married. Neetu was 25, another young woman with connections to the wider world. Dhruv and Shivam were 15 years old and going to school every day, sitting next to classmates, being taught by teachers, moving through the ordinary social world of adolescence. Bhuvanesh was a 50-year-old businessman who dealt with suppliers and customers and neighbors, and not one of them, not once, in 11 years, told anyone what was happening in that house. The psychiatrist Alok Saran said something after this case that has stayed with everyone who read it. He said, "The secrecy with which this happened speaks of the lack of interconnectedness of our society in terms of addressing mental health." And he is right. But there is something underneath even that. The Bhatia family was not isolated by geography or poverty or circumstance. They were isolated by something that lives inside every family to some degree. The instinct to keep the interior life of a family private. The habit of not saying to a neighbor or a friend or a doctor, "Something unusual is happening in my house, and I do not fully understand it." Every family has its rituals that the outside world does not see. Every family has its rules that were never formally agreed upon, but are followed anyway. Every family has a person whose authority is so embedded in the structure of the family that questioning them feels not like an act of reason, but an act of betrayal. The Bhatia family had all of these things, in a form so extreme that 11 people died from it. But the distance between what happened in that house and what happens in ordinary families is not as large as it is comfortable to believe. The psychiatrists who studied this case said it plainly. This is an extreme version of something recognizable.
Criminal investigations in India, as anywhere, follow the evidence. And the evidence in the Burari case was, in its own way, extraordinarily complete. The diaries told the investigators almost everything they needed to know. The CCTV footage confirmed the timeline. The forensic reports confirmed no external involvement. The post-mortem reports confirmed no signs of struggle or resistance among any of the 11 family members. Everything pointed in the same direction. And yet, the investigation took months, because what it was pointing toward was something investigators had no established template for. The Joint Commissioner of Police, who led the investigation, stated that the handwritten notes detailed how hands and legs were to be tied, and were consistent in every specific with the manner in which the 10 hanging bodies were found. The faces covered exactly as described, the mouths taped as specified, the cotton balls in the ears as instructed, the batches of 3, the way the diary said the hanging should be arranged, exactly as the bodies were discovered. The grandmother on the bed, as the diary had noted, she could not stand. Every detail of the scene had a corresponding line in the diaries, written days, weeks, years before. What the investigation could not produce was a living Lalit Bhatia to question. He was among the dead. His motivations, his interior experience, the precise nature of what he believed and when he began to believe it, all of it died with him on the night of June 30th. What investigators were left with was the record, 11 years of diary entries, a man's browsing history full of paranormal videos and ghost programs, a family's CCTV recorded final preparations, and the account of every neighbor and relative who described the Bhatias as a perfectly normal family, with no visible signs of anything wrong. One detail from the investigation has stayed with everyone who covered it. In the notes found at the scene, separate from the diaries, a register kept beside the family's home temple, there were entries about salvation, about appeasing God, about something the family called shunya. And in a diary entry from November 2017, 8 months before the deaths, there was a warning. You might not celebrate the next Diwali. Pay attention, rather than ignoring the warnings. Someone in the Bhatia family wrote that sentence in November 2017 and then celebrated Diwali in 2017 and continued their lives for 8 more months, going to school and running shops and hosting engagement parties, while a clock nobody outside that house could see was already counting down. The Burari deaths were reported internationally. The BBC covered them. Publications across Europe and North America picked them up. But the impact inside India was of a completely different order. Because in India, the Bhatia family was not exotic. They were not distant. They were a joint family living in a 3-story house running a grocery shop. Deeply religious, emotionally close. 3 generations under one roof, which is to say, they were a version of a family that hundreds of millions of Indian people recognize from their own lives. The horror was not that the Bhatias were unrecognizable. The horror was that they were not. The mental health conversation that erupted after Burari was unlike anything that had preceded it in India. Psychiatrists, journalists, sociologists, and ordinary people were all asking the same question at the same time. The question this case leaves behind, the one that the courts did not have to answer because there was no trial, the one that the psychiatric reports answered only partially, the one that keeps appearing in every serious discussion of what happened in that house, is this. At what point does faith become something that can kill you? At what point does the authority of a person you love become something that closes the door between you and every other voice in the world? At what point does the privacy of a family, the beautiful, necessary privacy of a family that loves each other and keeps its life to itself, become a wall that nobody outside can see through and nobody inside can climb? There are no prosecutions in this case. There are no perpetrators in a prison. There is no moment of formal accountability that the families of the victims can point to as justice, because the person at the center of it died in the same room as the people around him. And whether he knew what he was doing, whether Lalit Bhatia understood that the ritual he had been describing for 11 years would kill his family and himself, is a question that went with him. What remains is a sealed house on a street in North Delhi, 11 names, and the knowledge that on the morning of July 1st, 2018, a neighbor noticed a shop had not opened and walked to check on a family he thought he knew. He thought he knew them. So did everyone. That is the last line of this story, and it does not close.